Hello, Degrassi fans, and just kidding. We don't have to do that here because we're all best friends and we're just hanging out. So, quick moment to check in. A lot has happened since my last episode. I went through a hurricane. Doing okay, got my power back, but still without internet. So I can record a podcast. I just can't upload it for anyone to listen to it. So I'm sorry that this is delayed, but I do hope it's worth the wait. And by the time this comes out, Linda Schuyler will have announced her book launch, where she flew me out to Toronto and took me on a tour of Degrassi. Degrassi Street, Degrassi High, the community school, everything Degrassi, we did it. So stay tuned to the mother of all Degrassi on all social media for that. But for today, I wanted to follow up on a question I posted on Patreon. Should queer actors be cast for queer roles? I made a poll that you could interact with responses like, yes, this should always happen, or it's ideal, but there's reasons why it can't, or even, hey, they're actors. Who cares if they're really gay? Overwhelmingly, you guys responded with, it's ideal, but it can't always happen. And you know what? This was my answer too. There's just so much to think about. What if someone's not ready to come out? What if it's actually unsafe to label yourself a queer actor? And since Degrassi works with teenagers, is it unfair to ask kids to label their sexuality at only 15 years old? And then I sat down to think about it. What are my real answers to those questions? And why am I, as a queer person, so willing to accept that gay people can't always be hired to play gay people? So after lots of reflecting, I actually changed my mind. I think queer characters should always be played by queer actors. And not only that, I think Degrassi should actually make it a core value in every new iteration of the show going forward. So let's talk about it. Let's look at times Degrassi got queer casting right and times they got queer casting wrong, while also looking at your thoughts and opinions that you posted on Patreon. And of course, I'll answer the age-old question, how do I feel about the fact that my favorite lesbian is played by a straight girl? Before we fully break this down, I want to define a few things first. I'm going to be talking about diverse casting. And what I mean by this is when a show writes a gay character, they intentionally seek out queer and diverse actors to fill that role. Now, maybe you're bi, maybe you're pansexual, maybe you don't define your sexuality, but you fall somewhere within queer identity. That's what I mean by the term diverse casting in this context. Gay doesn't have to play gay, but queerness should be considered a part of your lived experience. I think when you're representing minorities on television or in movies, the people who take on that character should at least be a part of that minority. I don't think you should be able to dress up as a queer person, a Muslim person, or a disabled person, go through all of their problems, only to cash a paycheck and return to your life at the end of the day. Now, I'll spend this podcast explaining why I think that and how it fits in the context of Degrassi, but I want you to know what I mean when I say diverse casting, because I will say it a lot. And of course, this is just my opinion, but I do think characters are put on television to represent a certain group of people and tell stories from their unique perspective. Otherwise, why have these characters at all? So Jake Gyllenhaal, the whitest man on the planet, should not be cast as the Prince of Persia, in my opinion. And Scarlett Johansson, one of the most recognizable and famous cis women, should not be cast to play a trans person. They don't have the life experience to bring to the role. They aren't amplifying voices in that community. And they're cashing off the fact that Hollywood won't hire a real Persian actor for a lead role, or a real trans person as a male character, and that's not fair. Same with disabilities. Why can't characters who use wheelchairs be played by actors who use wheelchairs? They exist and they want to work. Now, what I am not saying is that if you are straight or white or you have no disabilities, that you are not allowed to play these roles ever. I am definitely not saying that. What I am saying is that diverse casting should be the priority. Casting directors should take proactive steps to make sure they've let disabled actors know, we want you to audition for this character, and it is a safe space to do so. Don't just assume that you can't find a real disabled person, and don't just send those auditions to non-disabled actors. Work with organizations and real people to make sure you've actually tried to hire the minority that you're telling stories about. Don't say you couldn't find them if you never even looked. And let's acknowledge that the only reason we don't have a lot of disabled actors, for example, is because we've never given them the opportunity to act. In fact, we've taken it away from them by assuming they can't do it and hiring able-bodied actors. One show that has done incredibly well at diverse casting is A League of Their Own on Amazon. They have plenty of queer characters that are played by real queer actors. They have racial diversity and gender diversity, But some of their gay characters are played by straight women. And I think that is great because A League of Their Own prioritized diverse casting. And they ended up with like 80% of their cast being truly diverse in real life and giving real people real opportunities. At the end of the day, you'll have to pick the actor that is best suited for the role. And that may mean straight actors will play gay characters. But I want those straight actors to be fairly put up against diverse actors. I want real Persian men to get the opportunity to play the Prince of Persia. And I want Hollywood to acknowledge that they capitalize off minorities because their stories are far more interesting, but they don't want to actually have to put them on TV or in movies. And I don't think any of this can change unless we have a diverse casting policy. So with all of that in mind, I'm finally going to be breaking down why I think diverse casting should be the new core value at Degrassi. So why Degrassi? Of all the shows in the world, why should this be the one that has a diverse casting policy? Well, Degrassi's entire brand is about amplifying youth voices. Right out of the Kids of Degrassi Street, Linda and her team started making core values that would carry on through every generation of the show. First, it was that all stories would be taken seriously and told from the kids' perspective. Then those core values just kept growing and growing. Like in Degrassi Junior High when Spike gets pregnant at only 14 years old. Degrassi made it a priority to go find real teenagers and ask them, what was this experience like for you? And even well into the next generation, we saw Degrassi make use of its most valuable resource for a teen TV show. They had actual teenagers. In season 12, they held a 45-minute discussion with the cast about the effects of suicide and used that conversation to shape their episode. The school shooting in season 4, they consulted with real professionals and counselors to make sure if they were going to tell this story, they were going to do it right. So Degrassi recognizes the power real voices have in their storytelling and the effect these characters can have on not just the audience, but the real-life actors who play them. So I want to break down 2 examples where Degrassi saw the value in having the actors play out their real-life experiences on the show. And maybe we'll start to see why queer actors should be given that same opportunity. After a night of band practice with the Zit Remedy, Wheels comes home to find a group of police officers. His grandmother's there, and she's crying. Wheels stands in pure shock as he learns his parents have just been killed by a drunk driver. In real life, the actor who plays Wheels said he wanted to take on this story because of how close he related to it in real life. When he was just a kid, his father passed away from an alcoholic's disease. Neil said, I thought it'd be a good experience for myself. At first, I was scared I was going to start thinking about my father again, but it actually helped. I was putting my emotions, along with Wheels' emotions, into the scene. Yan Moore, the head writer on Degrassi, questioned if this would be fair to the young actor. Would he be ready for it? Could he handle it? But ultimately, the obvious person to do it is Neil, he said. Overall, Neil's ability to relate to the subject matter made a larger impact on both himself and the audience who loves him. Degrassi saw the value in that right away. And this isn't a one-off example. Degrassi has always relied on their cast members for real and authentic stories. And sometimes those stories are controversial. Like when Degrassi shows BLT and Michelle, a black boy who's dating a white girl. We all know this caused a stir and got Linda boycotted by religious groups. But before all of that, the episode only came to life because of the real input from the actors in the show. After reading through the script, Linda proposed a question. Is racism an issue or a non-issue? Quickly, laughter filled the room as the kids started to weigh in with their opinion, because of course it is. But out of everyone who spoke up, Deo Ade, the actor who played BLT, had such unique experiences to add to the story. He's actually lived through scenarios where adults made judgments about him because of the color of his skin. He's experienced microaggressions because of the way he dresses. Deo's real-life input shapes this story and gives it that personal touch that makes us really feel his pain. In moments when he's called the N-word at school or told his kind can't be in certain places. So why can't this happen for queer storylines too? Why can't we ask real queer kids to sit in these rooms and share their opinions? And it can't go without saying that, of course, Degrassi has always been a pioneer for queer storytelling in media. I am definitely not trying to say that they're not doing enough. Back in 1987, one of Degrassi's first banned episodes was called Rumor Has It. The story followed Miss Avery, a person who lived her life as a public educator and a private gay woman. Allegedly. The story comes right out of Linda Schuyler's personal life. She frequently tells us about Bruce Mackey, a gay friend she met while teaching before she ever went on to make the show at all. Linda has pioneered queer storytelling, and I think she told stories that best reflected the world of the time. You could hardly talk about gay people at all on television, let alone make them main characters on a show about teenagers. But now, times are changing, and I think the new Degrassi should take on this responsibility of diverse casting. Because whether it's Wheels, BLT, or Miss Avery, Degrassi shows us why real stories make a difference, and how much of an impact it can be when someone brings their own experience to a character. So with all of that being said, what about times Degrassi's done it right? When have they hired a queer actor for a role and truly embraced the idea of diverse casting? It's time we talk about Tristan Milligan, Degrassi's first queer character that arrived to the school gay and proud. It was the first time we met a queer character who didn't have a big coming out moment with confusing feelings and a lot of self-hatred. Instead, Tristan loved himself, and we love him for that. As we learned on the podcast, Tristan's character was actually created after Lyle auditioned for the show. He arrived to the set openly queer and beaming at the fact that he was auditioning for Degrassi. When he was just 10 years old, he saw characters like Alex, Paige, and Marco. When Lyle heard he got a call back for Tristan, he said, "I love that he came to Degrassi just out and proud," having no idea he influenced this monumental moment just by being himself. And by Degrassi Next Class, characters like Miles and VJ are following suit and just showing up to Degrassi out and proud. Now they're even writing scenes between two male characters where they openly talk about sex. And this is where I want to bring in your comments, because the next person I obviously want to talk about is Marco. Adamo Ruggiero plays Marco, and he's very, very open about the fact that Marco helped him come out of the closet. He said, "The lines were blurred. Sometimes I was one step ahead of Marco, and other times he was one step ahead of me." On Patreon, Tanisha commented that on shows like Winona Earp and Carmilla, some of the actors had similar stories. Because they played gay or genderqueer characters on screen, it helped them understand their own sexualities and come out of the closet themselves. Tanisha said the actor Kay Alexander had no idea what being non-binary meant until they started playing a non-binary character on Carmilla. "I don't think people should lose out on queer roles just because they haven't let the world know how they identify," she said. Sierra added, "When casting teenagers, you might not know if you're LGBT at that age. I didn't know how I identified until much later in life. And same, I came out as gay when I was 17, but I battle every day with my gender identity." But I want to challenge those comments because I think the same thing. These are reasons why it is hard to cast queer actors. However, does it have to be? Sure, some kids might not know their identity quite yet, but there are teenagers who do know their gender and do know their sexualities at a younger age. Lyle, for example, arrived to Degrassi openly queer at only 15 years old, and that's a result of watching queer characters on television while he was growing up. When Adamo was asked who his gay icons were, he said, "I don't mean to sound self-indulgent, but it really was Marco. There just wasn't any other gay people on TV." And I love that, but I think we can see that because of characters like Marco and because of actors like Adamo, things on television started to change. When you put real diversity in shows and on television sets, it can make a difference. Lyle grew up watching Degrassi and seeing queer characters on TV, and now his generation is filled with kids who are okay with just being themselves. Representation did that, normalization did that, amplifying queer voices did that. The more diversity you put on your sets, the more you're showing the world that these are real people with real stories to tell. For example, my favorite podcaster is named Matt Baum. He does videos about queer history on television. He might talk about the first time the Golden Girls had a gay character. He might talk about the effects of Ellen DeGeneres coming out on TV in the 90s. But either way, he talks about how popular television influenced the way audiences felt about queer people. Seeing us on TV made people realize we're not freaks and we're not scary and we're not going to try to kiss you. So Degrassi knows real stories are important. Degrassi knows queer stories are important. They fully grasp this concept by hiring Lyle to play Tristan. So why can't this happen with every diverse character going forward? It's great to know that our stories can be on TV, but shouldn't we get to be on TV too? And of course, what about times where Degrassi didn't get it right? Like when they hired a female actress to play a trans character. Adam Torres was a legendary character played by a talented actress. There is absolutely no denying that. Glad Media recognized both Degrassi and Jordan Todesey for their representation of the trans experience in high school. Adam was the first leading trans character in a scripted series. Like, that's incredible, and that is the stuff that makes me a proud Degrassi fan. However, I do think it is fair to both love Degrassi and love Adam and love Jordy, while still asking, why didn't they hire a trans actor to play Adam? You guys had lots of comments about it, so let's dive in. But first, we'll get caught up. Why was Geordie cast for the show in the first place? Michael Grassi, one of the writers on Degrassi, funny enough, said, we were just looking for the best person to play the role, and we found Jordan. So they did not prioritize diverse casting, which automatically means trans kids are at a disadvantage from getting the role. Casting notices did not go out with any type of notion that they were encouraging diverse actors to apply. Michael also noted that in this new day and age of social media, not only could they go out into the community and talk to real trans people, but kids were now doing vlogs about their transition online. He said it made research much more accessible and meant they could capture a lot of the trans experience in Adam's story. So, Degrassi admits that they had lots and lots of trans kids accessible to them who were open to telling their stories and being on camera, but never considered actually hiring one. And Degrassi also confirmed that hiring a female actress was a positive choice for them because it made it easier to physically transition Geordie into Adam. Now, this was 12 years ago, so we do have to be mindful of that. Adam was the first leading trans character in a scripted series. It is easy to reflect back and say they didn't do good enough. But in saying that, in my opinion, Degrassi did it better than anyone else, but they still didn't do their best. And I think that is okay, because it tells me that Degrassi is always willing to grow and be better than they were before. And that diverse casting really could be a policy that we'll see in the future. Many Degrassi fans continued this conversation online, saying, well, wouldn't it be harmful to expect someone to slow down or speed up their transition based on the needs of the show? Or even worse, what about those moments where Adam becomes Gracie again and starts dressing like a girl? Is it harmful to put a trans kid through that and experience this on national television? At one point, I thought about all of this too. But my criticisms are this. Degrassi's recognized that trans kids need a voice on TV. That's step one. Degrassi's found kids online who are open to getting in front of the camera and talking about their transition. So it's no issue to find real trans kids who can play Adam. And in the past, Degrassi has seen the value when teenagers like Neil Hope play out their difficult experiences on TV. So why couldn't they do that now with trans kids? Is it up to a group of cisgendered writers and producers to decide that just having Adam on the show is representation enough? That's my question. On Patreon, Georgia, Owen, and Riley all commented on how impactful it is when trans characters are played by trans actors in real life. Owen said, I'm trans, so Adam was the first trans masked character that I saw on TV who was actually out of the closet. That was helpful for me. Geordie was great, but it would have been better if a trans actor played the role. Riley added, I think it's really important for trans characters to be played by trans actors. A lot of straight actors do an amazing job playing queer roles, but with trans actors, it's a lot harder to portray if you've never been through it. Rewatching Degrassi, I find myself criticizing many things about Adam's character. And Georgia, who goes by eclairefimogen on Twitter, agreed that having a trans actor in a trans role will have a bigger impact. And I agree. It's hard to look back on this because we love Geordie. And I don't think we even need to decide if Adam should have been cast as a trans actor originally, but I do think we can agree that going forward, it needs to happen. On one hand, we can praise Degrassi for being so forward-thinking. On the other, I don't want to twist their words, but what they said was working with Jordan was easier because she's a girl they can model into a guy, which is not a far cry away from saying it would have been hard to work with a real trans person. So I think it's fair to criticize Degrassi for doing a lot, but still not doing enough. And I think this perfectly showcases why we need real diversity on the set. We need real queer actors to play real queer roles. And I don't think that responsibility just stops at the actors. In an interview, Degrassi writer James Hurst commented on how they failed at discussions around racism. He said, I don't think we did a good job, and I feel bad for that. We tried to plot with Hazel where she experiences Islamophobia, but ultimately we failed on the issue. Shelley Scarrow added that they realized too late that being a child actor in itself comes from a place of privilege. Since your parents need to prioritize your career, sometimes over their own. We failed to find children of color who had acting experience. Our privilege was really showing in that moment, she said. She also noted that Degrassi just didn't have enough people of color in the writing staff, meaning their ability to capture authentic voices was lost. So Degrassi acknowledges that because they didn't prioritize diverse casting, they failed at representing real stories. So what about Jordan? As a real teenage actor playing this role, how did she feel about all this responsibility to represent the trans experience? One thing I want to touch on first is that extra layer of Degrassi fans saying that trans kids might not want to go through those experiences on camera. And that's exactly why I think real representation is so important. I've accepted that as an answer this whole time, ever since I really saw Adam in the first place. I was like, okay, it makes sense that that could be hard for someone. I get it. However, no one thought to just ask a trans person. This reminds me of an episode in Degrassi Junior High where Caitlin, Diana, Melanie, they all want to go to the movies, but their friend Maya uses a wheelchair and she can't get into the theater. They decide to just not tell her so she doesn't feel embarrassed about being disabled. Of course, she ends up finding out and she gets incredibly upset. She said there's other theaters that are accessible, or we could have rented a movie and stayed at my house. There's lots of options. Don't just decide that I can't do something. And I think we need to apply that logic to diverse casting. We can't just step in and say, oh, that would probably be really hard for someone. Let's not upset them. I take a lot of pride in telling my coming out story. I take a lot of pride in my mental health journey. It feels good to take something that was really hard for me and help other people with it. And same goes for lots of trans kids, I'm sure of it. The reason I bring this up specifically is because by saying real trans kids can't handle this or real queer kids can't handle that means we're saying straight kids or cis kids should just handle it instead. We're saying that because they're just acting, it's easier for them to play out these traumatic moments. Melinda Shankar, who played Ali Bandari on Degrassi, she has a podcast in real life where she talks about maintaining your health and wellness as someone who works in the entertainment industry. In one episode, she talked about how in Degrassi, Ali goes through an abusive relationship. Melinda said in these intense moments, you try to get in the same headspace as your character, but it can be hard when the scene is over and you have to go back to your regular life. She said, I didn't feel like Mindy when I went home. It's hard to shake yourself out of that when you know you have to go right back there tomorrow and do it all over again. So that made me curious. How did Jordy feel about playing Adam on Degrassi? What was it like to spend your most formative years on television as a boy? And how did she maintain her health and wellness in the same industry as Melinda? First, I want to say I'm only going to read these comments from actual interviews where either Jordy or Melinda decided they wanted to talk about their health and wellness in the entertainment industry. I'm not going to share anything from like their personal social media or live streams or anything like that. Just public comments where they intended to talk about what it was like to be on Degrassi. But Jordan said she left Degrassi because she needed to take a break from acting. As a child star, she was feeling a lot of pressure. She said, I had issues with body image. I was suffering with an eating disorder and I dabbled into dark things. Adding on that slowly through meditation and yoga, I literally did a complete turnaround, she said. So we can't say that only trans kids will have a hard time transitioning on television when they're not ready. We asked Jordy to transition on television. Sure, it may have been pretend, but she really had to cut her hair. She really had to change her posture and tone and appearance and everything about her identity. And I can assume she probably had less resources available to her because she wasn't really trans. I can absolutely understand why you would struggle with your identity and your body image when you're a very feminine person in real life, but because of the character you play, you're lumped in as one of the guys. She never ever talked about this or anything, but I just know from being a fan online and seeing all of this happen, the Degrassi girls were always doing photo shoots. They were in makeup and dresses and being asked about prom and boys and dating, but Jordy was never involved in these. I assume it's because she was playing a boy on TV and no magazine or media company wanted to boast about how feminine Adam's actress was in real life. I don't know, but I can see why this would be hard for Jordy. She said that she loved playing Adam and that he represented everyone who was an outcast in high school, but ultimately it was affecting her mental health to be a child actor and she had to take a break. We can all agree that Jordy did amazing. She gave us such a lovable and cherished character and really put her full heart into Adam. He's one of my top favorite characters in the entire legacy of the show. But was it fair to Jordy to make her go through all of that? Or is acting really all just about taking on a character? Glenn commented on Patreon saying, limiting queer roles to queer actors almost contradicts the art of acting itself, adding that it's partially in how a character is written that can add to their performance. And I can agree because we talked about how Degrassi didn't have enough diversity on their writing team. There was no trans actors writing on the show. And they said it was hard to bring diverse characters to life like Hazel Aden with Islamophobia. Andrea Lewis, who played Hazel, actually makes content online about what it's like to be a black actress working on sets, especially ones that aren't prepared to handle black skin. She said on shows like Degrassi, she'd showed up to set and have to do her own hair and makeup while all of her other white co-stars transformed into their characters every day. They didn't have makeup for darker skin tones, and they didn't have Black-friendly hair products. Andrea said, if you ever wondered why Hazel was always in headbands, it's because it was the easiest way I could do my own hair and still make sure it looked the same in every scene. And that goes to show you how diversity matters everywhere. Not just the actors, not just the writers, but even in hair and makeup, wardrobe, even in lighting a scene with multiple skin tones. Diverse representation needs to be a part of every aspect of filmmaking, especially on a show like Degrassi, where authentic and real storytelling has been a core value of the brand since the very beginning. How can you really live up to that if you aren't committing to it behind the scenes as well? But I think I've gone through most of your comments, so now let's finally answer the question you've been waiting for. How do I feel about Annie Clark playing a gay character like Fiona Coyne? I'm in love with her and she's a girl, says my favorite straight person. Now, Brittany actually made a good point over on Patreon. She said, I always end up loving the straight actors who are playing a queer character. So I'm torn. I'm a lesbian, so seeing Paige and Alex's storyline with two girls on screen was exciting at the time. And I totally agree. I don't think we have to go back and recast anyone, but I do think going forward, we can prioritize diversity. Because just like you, I care about the actors just as much as I care about the characters. And I think they all made their own impact on the show in their own unique ways, even the straight ones. But I have 3 points to make about this topic, honestly. 1, hands down, Annie Clark has been one of the most supportive people I've ever known. I talked about this on my second episode where I said it's an incredible feeling to have Fiona help me come out of the closet and learn to love myself, and have Annie Clark be right there to say, see, and you're wonderful just the way you are. I think Annie and many of the people who work on Degrassi really take pride in what they do. No pun intended. But I mean, Stacey Mistician even said in the days of Degrassi Junior High, she said, you want those big storylines. You want to get AIDS or you want to get pregnant. And I think they understand the full scope of what that means to be an advocate for whatever issue you take on. And Annie Clark, I mean, I don't know if I would be this connected to the show if it wasn't for her celebrating me for the last 10 years. So no, I do not hate Annie Clark. Do I wish she was gay? I mean, come on. But no, to be honest, truthfully in my answer, I think if Fiona was played by a lesbian, it would have elevated her character and it would have meant more to the queer community. But I don't think Fiona being played by a straight actor at the time took away anything from that experience. It didn't make it worse. Ultimately, we can't even have the conversation should queer actors be playing queer characters unless we actually have queer characters in the first place. And I respect Annie and all of the other straight actors who took on these roles and these stories when it was still a controversial issue. I mean, for example, Kurt from Glee didn't appear on television until 7 years after we met Marco on Degrassi. When Fiona was on the air, I can't think of one other TV show that had a leading lesbian character who was a teenager. We had the L Word, but that was all adults. And we had Skins, which aired in the UK, and that's it. So with every character we talked about, the fact that they were on TV was huge for its time. Adam, Fiona, Marco, Tristan, these characters all reflected the reality of what it was like to be queer in high school at a time that no one was putting us on TV. So we love Adamo, we love Jordy, we love Lyle, and oh my God, do we love Annie Clark. So we've done it. Let's get into our final breakdown and summarize why I think diverse casting should be the new core value on Degrassi. Degrassi's had a long legacy of telling queer stories. From Miss Avery, who's a teacher by day and a lesbian by night, allegedly, to Tristan Milligan, who arrives at Degrassi out and proud as a gay boy. Degrassi's always understood the responsibility of representing queer stories for young teenagers to see themselves in. However, that same priority wasn't reflected behind the scenes when it came to the actors who actually played them. Adamo was cast as the first leading gay character on Degrassi, even though he identified as straight. His boyfriends on the show were all played by straight men, and even the characters that followed, like Riley and Fiona, were all played by straight actors. It's hard to understand why when Degrassi's always placed so much emphasis on the importance of real voices in their stories. In the 80s, Degrassi had real gay men who were HIV positive come to visit Degrassi and talk to the cast and characters about their real-life experience. What's it like to be HIV positive? How does it feel when people are afraid of you? Are you scared you're going to die? So why didn't authentic queer voices stay on the show when it came time to tell their stories as teenagers? Luckily, Degrassi recognizes that they didn't always do their best when it came to diversity on their set. Shelley Scarrow commented on how their writer's room just didn't have enough people of color to truly capture the experience of being Black, Asian, Indigenous, or really anything other than white in high school. And they definitely didn't have writers who were trans or non-binary. And Degrassi actually learned from these mistakes. By the time Degrassi Next Class comes around, kids are gay, queer, Muslim, non-binary, Black, Asian, and they're all leading characters. Degrassi started correcting their history and leading the way with true diversity on their show. But still, diverse casting wasn't necessarily a priority. Degrassi hired actors to play Syrian refugee students who had to put on accents. Degrassi hired straight males to play bisexual characters. Degrassi had Indigenous actors, but never commented on how this might affect their high school experience. Now, in a new world where it's okay to be gay and teenagers are much more open about sharing their personal stories with the world, it's a no-brainer that this new Degrassi should be more diverse than all the iterations that came before it. Having real diversity on your sets in every department, every casting call, every writer's room means we can hear real stories from real people and actually make a difference. Degrassi has the power, and at this point, I think the responsibility to show all kids who are different that your story matters. I saw someone who looked like me on TV, and now it's time for a whole new generation of kids to have that exact same experience. And that's why I think diverse casting should be the new core value on Degrassi. Thank you so much to Tanisha, Sierra, Owen, Riley, Georgia, Glenn, and Brittany for helping me out with this podcast. It's so interesting to challenge my own thoughts and opinions on this because I agreed with every single comment you guys had. This was so fun, and the conversation doesn't have to stop here. Let's keep chatting in the comments because I would also love to know what kind of diverse representation you'd like to see going forward in the new series. I personally would like to see more Indigenous characters and more gender fluidity on the show. But what about you? What do you think? I love you guys so much. Thanks for chatting. Bye.